Still taking public transport, Mom taunted over the Thanksgiving turkey. Dad smirked, swirling his wine. Your sister has 3 cars, Alexandra. Honestly, it's pathetic. The table erupted in laughter, a sound that used to break me. But this year I didn't flinch. I simply checked my watch. The vibration in my pocket was the only validation I needed. I answered the phone calmly. Ma'am, Captain Sterling's voice cut through the mockery. Your helicopter fleet is approaching the landing zone. I hung up and looked at my mother. Her face went pale as the distant thrum of rotors began to shake the fine china. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain myself. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community tonight. The heater on the number 42 bus was broken again. I watched my breath fog against the scratched glass, obscuring the passing snow-covered pines. To the woman sitting across from me, clutching her grocery bags, I looked like a failure. A 31-year-old woman traveling alone on Christmas Eve, wearing a coat that had seen better days, heading toward the wealthy district where I presumably couldn't afford to live. She offered me a sympathetic, pitying smile. I returned it. She didn't know that the coat was vintage cashmere or that the phone in my pocket contained the encryption keys to Aether Logistics, a company currently valued at $3.3 to $6 billion. I shifted in the hard plastic seat, feeling the cold seep into my bones. Most people would ask why. Why endure the 2-hour transit, the freezing temperatures, the judgment of strangers, and the mockery of my own family? Why not just buy the fleet of Bentleys I could pay for with a single dividends check? It wasn't about frugality. It was about survival strategy. I call it the iceberg illusion. In the world of logistics, you learn quickly that the most valuable cargo is the one nobody notices. My sister Madison operates on the opposite principle. She is the tip of the iceberg, bright, visible, loud, and blindingly white. She measures her worth in likes, least horsepower, and the envy of strangers. But the tip of the iceberg is the part that melts first. It is the part that gets battered by the storm. It is the part that is fragile. I chose to be the 90% beneath the surface. That is where the mass is. That is where the unshakable weight resides. And most importantly, that is where the danger is. By staying underwater, by remaining invisible, I avoided the liabilities that plagued Madison. I didn't have fake friends asking for loans. I didn't have scammers targeting my accounts. I moved through the world like a ghost, observing everything controlling the currents, while everyone else was distracted by the shiny object floating on top. My family saw a bus ticket and assumed poverty. I saw a $2.50 operational cost for total anonymity. It was a bargain. The bus hissed to a halt at the edge of the estate district. I stepped out into the biting wind. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on the unplowed road leading up to Lakeside Manor. This house was my parents' pride and joy. They had moved in 3 years ago, bragging about the incredible lease terms they had secured from a benevolent anonymous landlord. They loved the heated floors, the sprawling grounds, and the prestige of the address. They had no idea that the Trans Global Properties LLC they sent their rent checks to was a subsidiary I managed from my laptop. I trudged up the long driveway, my boots crunching in the fresh powder. My father, Robert, would see me walking and make a comment about my lack of drive. My mother, Susan, would sigh and ask if I needed gas money, ignoring the fact that I didn't own a car to put gas into. It was a performance I had perfected over 8 years. I was the silent partner in their lives, the structural beam holding up the roof they slept under, yet they treated me like the termite gnawing at the floorboards. Tonight, however, the dynamic would shift. I wasn't just walking into a family dinner. I was walking into a liquidation meeting. I adjusted my scarf, checked the time, and prepared to play the role of the disappointment one last time. The cold didn't bother me anymore. It just made me sharper. The driveway of Lakeside Manor was a shrine to bad financial decisions. Dominating the pavers, dusted in a light coating of snow, sat a brand-new Mercedes G-Wagon. It was jet black, boxy, and aggressive, wrapped in a ridiculous oversized red bow that looked like it had been wrestled from a department store display. My sister Madison had posted about it 3 times already this morning. Least luxury, the caption should have read. $144,000 of German engineering that she didn't actually own, parked in front of a house she didn't actually pay for. I walked past the vehicle, my boots leaving a solitary trail in the pristine snow. The front door swung open before I could knock. Warmth spilled out, carrying the scent of roasting rosemary and expensive cologne, but the faces greeting me were anything but welcoming. "Oh, Alexandra," my mother Susan sighed, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. She looked at the roadway behind me with that specific expression she reserved for stray dogs and disappointed daughters. "Did you take the bus again? In this weather?" My father, Robert, stood behind her, swirling a glass of scotch. "We told you we could have sent Ryan to pick you up," he muttered, shaking his head. "You don't have to make a spectacle of your situation." I stepped into the foyer, stamping the snow from my boots. The heat of the house wrapped around me a heating system I had paid to repair last winter when the boiler cracked. They didn't know that, of course. They thought their mysterious, benevolent landlord had handled it. As I looked at my parents, I felt the familiar hollow ache of being a glass child. It is a psychological phenomenon usually reserved for the healthy siblings of sick children, the ones who are looked through because the focus is always elsewhere. But in our family, the dynamic was twisted. I wasn't looked through because Madison was sick. I was looked through because Madison was loud. My parents didn't see me. They saw a projection of their own fears, a woman without a car, without a husband, without the flashy trappings of the success they worshipped. To them I was transparent, a ghost haunting their perfect holiday tableau. They looked right through my physical presence and saw only the empty space where they believed a successful daughter should be standing. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "The bus is reliable." "It's embarrassing," she whispered, leaning in as if sharing a conspiracy. "Madison's friends are here. Please just try not to mention the commute." I walked past them into the living room. The irony was suffocating. I looked at the high vaulted ceilings, the mahogany beams, the expansive view of the frozen lake. 3 years ago, this house was hours away from a sheriff's sale. My father's consulting firm had bled dry, and the bank was done waiting. I had intervened 48 hours before the auction. Using a shell company, I purchased the deed, cleared the arrears, and offered them a leaseback agreement at 40% of the market rate. I wasn't just a guest in this house. I was the structural integrity. I was the bank. I was the roof over their heads and the floor beneath their feet. Yet as I stood there clutching my bag, I was treated like an intruder. Alex Madison's voice pierced the air. She floated down the staircase holding a glass of champagne dressed in sequins that caught the light. "You made it. Did you see the truck outside? The dealership dropped it off this morning. Can you believe it?" "It's very shiny," I said. "It's a G63, she corrected, rolling her eyes. "Not that you'd know the difference. It's what success looks like, Alex. You should take notes." She turned back to her friends, my cousins Ryan and Lauren, who were already laughing phones out, ready to document the charity case's arrival. The warmth of the house I owned couldn't touch the absolute zero of the reception I received. I tightened my grip on my phone. The countdown had begun. They saw a ghost. They were about to meet the poltergeist. Dinner was served on the fine bone china I had purchased during the initial leaseback agreement. The table groaned under the weight of a catered feast: prime rib, truffled mash, roasted vegetables, all paid for with the rent money I secretly funneled back into the property's upkeep. The family sat around it like monarchs holding court with Madison at the head and me squeezed into a folding chair near the kitchen door. My father, Robert, tapped his crystal goblet with a silver fork. The room fell silent. He stood up, his face flushed with wine and self-importance. "I want to propose a toast," he announced, his gaze resting lovingly on my sister. "To Madison. For securing the lease on that beautiful machine outside. It represents something important in this family. It represents drive." He paused for effect, letting his eyes slide over to me with heavy significance. "There are 2 types of people in this world, passengers and drivers. Passengers wait for the world to come to them. They stand on corners in the cold. They let life happen to them. But drivers take the wheel. Drivers dictate their own destination." "Hear, hear," my cousin Ryan shouted, raising his glass. Beside him, Lauren was already recording her phone camera trained on my face, waiting for the reaction shot. I didn't give them one. I cut my meat with surgical precision. "It's true," Madison chimed in, swirling her wine. "It's about ambition. Alex, are you still doing that? What do you call it? That logistics project?" "Ether logistics," I said, not looking up. "Right. Aether." She giggled, a sharp, brittle sound. "Like the gas, or like ethereal, meaning it doesn't actually exist, because Ryan tried to Google you earlier. No website, no LinkedIn. Just a shell corporation in Delaware. It's getting kind of sad, Alex. You've been building this imaginary empire for 8 years. At what point do you admit it's a hobby?" "It's not a hobby," I said quietly. "It's a holding company." A holding company for what? Ryan jeered. Bus passes. The table erupted. This was the ritual, the annual carving of the disappointment. They didn't want answers. They wanted submission. They needed me to be the failure so Madison could be the success. It was a zero-sum game in their minds. My mother, Susan, placed a hand on my arm. Her touch was light, but it burned. Honey, listen, she said, dropping her voice to that pitying tone she used for bad news. Your father and I were talking. We know you're struggling. We know you're proud. But it's not safe for a woman of your age to be standing at bus stops. It's embarrassing. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and slid it across the tablecloth. It's a printout for a 2014 Honda Civic, she whispered. It has high mileage, but it runs. If you can come up with $500, we'll cover the down payment. You can pay us back in installments, $20 a month. We just want you to have some dignity. The printout showed a rusted silver sedan, 180,000 miles. The offer was a masterclass in humiliation masked as charity. They were offering me a life raft made of lead, unaware that I owned the ocean. I looked at the Honda. Then I looked at Madison preening in her sequins. Then I looked at the time. I appreciate the offer, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. But I won't be needing a car. Because you prefer the bus, Dad scoffed. Don't be a martyr, Alexandra. No, I said, because my ride is here. My phone buzzed against the table. A single text from Captain Sterling Fleet holding at designated altitude, awaiting green light. I picked up my phone. Lauren zoomed in. Who are you texting? Madison snapped. Your imaginary assistant. My pilot, I said. The silence that followed wasn't respectful. It was the silence of people watching a mental breakdown. Okay, Dad said, sitting down heavily. That's enough. You need professional help. I don't need help, I said, standing up. I need you to look out the window. The ringtone was deafening in the sudden quiet of the dining room. It wasn't my usual standard chirp. It was a priority alert tone reserved for fleet command. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Captain Sterling. Answer it, Madison challenged, her voice dripping with disdain. Let's hear what Captain Imaginary has to say. I swiped the screen and put it on speaker. Go ahead, Captain. Ma'am, we are 20 minutes out from the LZ. Sterling's voice crackled through the phone, crisp military and undeniably real. Formation is holding steady. Weather is optimal. We have visual on the estate. The room went still. My father froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. My mother blinked rapidly. Maintain approach vector, I said, my voice shifting. It wasn't the voice of the disappointment anymore. It was the voice of the CEO who negotiated 9-figure government contracts before breakfast. Landing zone is clear. Proceed as scheduled. Copy that Ether 1. ETA 19 minutes. I ended the call and placed the phone on the table. The screen went black, reflecting the stunned faces around me. Who was that? My father asked, his voice losing some of its bluster. My head of flight operations, I said. He's bringing the car. The car. Madison laughed, but it sounded nervous. You're having a car delivered. What did you finally lease a Honda? Not exactly, I said. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that made my mother flinch. I walked to the head of the table, standing behind Madison. For 8 years I began my voice low, and even you have asked me why I haven't made it. You have asked why I don't have a car, why I live in a studio, why I don't have a corner office. You called it failure. Because it is, Ryan shouted, emboldened by the wine. You're 31 and you take the bus. It's called the bamboo growth theory, I said, ignoring him. Did you know that Chinese bamboo spends 5 years underground? You water it, you fertilize it, and you see nothing. Not a single sprout. For 5 years, it looks like failure. It looks like barren earth. But under the soil, it is building a root system massive enough to support what comes next. And in the 5th year, it shoots up 80 feet in 6 weeks. I leaned down, bringing my face close to Madison's. I haven't been failing, Madison. I've been building my roots. I built a logistical infrastructure that spans 14 countries. I built a fleet of 327 aircraft. I built a company valued at $3.3 to $6 billion. I spent 8 years underground so that when I finally broke the surface, nothing could knock me down. You're lying, Madison whispered, her hands shaking. You're insane. Am I? I checked my watch. 15 minutes. You wanted proof. You wanted me to show you success. I'm not just going to show you. I'm going to land it on your lawn. This is ridiculous. Dad stood up, his face purple. Enough of this charade. There is no company. There are no aircraft. You are mentally unstable, Alexandra. I am calling Dr. Evans right now to get you committed. Call him, I said. But you might want to step outside first. The reception is better in the snow. I walked to the French doors and threw them open. The cold air rushed in, extinguishing the candles. Everyone out, I commanded. Excuse me, Mom gasped. Out, I repeated. You wanted to see my car. It's too big to fit in the driveway. We need the yard. I'm not going out there, Madison scoffed. It's freezing. You're going, I said. Because in about 14 minutes, the wind shear from 3 Sikorsky 76 helicopters is going to blow these windows out if you don't open them. I grabbed my coat and walked into the night. One by one, driven by a mix of fury, confusion, and terrifying curiosity, they followed me into the cold. The bamboo was about to break the surface, and it was going to be loud. The wind outside was merciless. It whipped across the frozen lake, carrying ice crystals that stung exposed skin. My family stood huddled in a miserable cluster near the driveway, shivering in their holiday finery. Madison's sequins offered zero protection against the elements, and her teeth were already chattering. My father, Robert, clutched his Scotch glass like a lifeline, the liquid threatening to freeze. They looked small against the backdrop of the winter night, small, angry, and entirely out of their element. "This is insane," Madison shrieked over the wind, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's been 5 minutes. There's nothing here, Alex, just snow and darkness. You're sick. You made us come out here to freeze just to prove—" "What? That you're crazy?" "I brought you out here to clarify the chain of command," I said. "I wasn't cold." Adrenaline is a powerful insulator. I walked over to the G-Wagon. The giant red bow was already sagging under the weight of the snow. My gloved hand traced the cold steel of the hood. "It is a beautiful machine," I admitted. $144,000. The lease payments must be brutal. $2,800 a month. "What do you know about it?" Madison snapped. "You take the bus." "I know," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket because I own the paper on it. I tapped the screen and held it up for her to see. It was a digital notification from the leasing portal of Prestige Automotive Group. Prestige Automotive was acquired by Ether Logistics 6 weeks ago, I explained calmly. I was reviewing our high-risk accounts this morning. I noticed a lease signed by a Madison Vance with a cosigner. Dad. The debt-to-income ratio was flagged as unstable. Madison stared at the screen, her eyes widening. "I exercised the owner's clause," I said. Clause 4B. Termination of agreement due to insolvency risk. Effective immediately. You can leave the keys in the ignition. My crew will collect it when we leave. You can't," she stammered. "Dad signed for it." "I know," I said, turning to Robert. "Which brings us to the second item of business." My father stepped forward, his face a mask of fury and confusion. "You listen to me, Alexandra. I don't know what kind of game you're playing with this fake app or whatever this is, but you do not speak to us like this on my property. This is my house. I pay the rent. I command the respect." "Your property?" I asked. I swiped left on my phone, bringing up a PDF document. It was a property deed stamped and notarized 3 years ago. The owner listed was TG Properties, LLC. "Do you know what TG stands for, Dad?" I asked. "Transglobal, my real estate holding company." I watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back slightly, looking from me to the house and back again. 3 years ago, the bank was foreclosing on you," I said, my voice cutting through the wind. "You hid it well, but public records don't lie. You were going to lose everything. So I bought the note. I cleared the arrears. And I had my lawyers draw up a leaseback agreement at 40% of the market value, so you wouldn't have to pack your bags in shame." I took a step closer to them. "You aren't the landlord, Dad. You're the tenant, and you're late on this month's rent." "No," my mother whispered, her hand covering her mouth. The landlord is a corporation." "Mr. Sterling handles the emails." "Captain Sterling," I corrected. "My head of operations. He handles my real estate portfolio when he's not flying my helicopters." The silence that fell over the driveway was heavier than the snow. The arrogance, the mockery, the Honda Civic offer, it all evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, hollow understanding. They weren't looking at the disappointment anymore. They were looking at the owner of their entire world. "You've been living in my house," I said, letting the words hang in the freezing air. "Driving a car leased from my company. Eating food paid for by the rent I subsidized. And for 8 years you have treated me like a trespasser in my own life." "Alex," Dad choked out. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I'm saying it now," I replied. I looked up at the sky. The first searchlight cut through the clouds, a beam of pure white brilliance illuminating the snow. And here comes the rest of the statement. The sound started as a vibration in the soles of my boots, a low-frequency thrum that rattled the ice on the tree branches. Then it became a roar that swallowed the winter night whole. My mother screamed something, but her words were instantly shredded by the noise. She grabbed my father's arm, her eyes wide with a primal instinctual fear. They weren't looking at a daughter anymore. They were looking at a force of nature. 3 black shapes detached themselves from the darkness above, Searchlights swept the grounds, turning the falling snow into blinding columns of white fire. These weren't traffic choppers or news birds. They were Sikorsky S-76 Deltas, the apex predators of executive transport. $15.6 million of aerospace engineering per unit, painted in matte black with the silver ether logo emblazoned on the tail. They moved with a synchronized predatory grace, hovering like dragonflies before descending in a perfect triangular formation. The downwash hit us a second later. It was a physical wall of wind whipping the snow into a frenzy. Madison shrieked and ducked, shielding her face with her hands. The giant red bow on her leased G-Wagon was ripped from the hood and sent tumbling across the frozen lawn like a piece of bloody gauze. My father staggered back, clutching the porch railing to stay upright. I didn't move. I stood in the center of the storm, letting the wind bite my face, watching my empire land on the grass I owned. The lead helicopter Ether 1 touched down with barely a tremor. The other two flanked it, their rotors slowing to a menacing whoosh. The silence that returned to the yard was heavier than the noise had been. It was the silence of a paradigm shifting of a world tilting on its axis. The side door of Ether 1 slid open. Captain Sterling stepped out onto the snow. He wasn't wearing a pilot's costume. He was in full Ether flight gear, slate gray, with tactical precision. Two other crew members flanked him, moving with the efficiency of Special Forces operators. They didn't look at the house. They didn't look at the G-Wagon. They didn't look at my parents. Sterling marched straight to me, ignoring my father, who was standing 3 feet away, with his mouth gaping open. The captain stopped 2 paces in front of me and snapped a salute that was sharp enough to cut glass. CEO on deck, he announced, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. Fleet is secure and ready for extraction, ma'am. We have the flight plan filed for the tropical site. Wheels up at your command. I returned the nod, keeping my hands in my coat pockets. Thank you, Captain. The cargo. The catering team has secured the holiday meal on Aether 2, Sterling reported. We also recovered the keys to the company vehicle as requested. He held up a set of Mercedes keys. Madison gasped, patting her pockets, realizing too late that the spare fob she kept in her coat had been surrendered to the dealership protocols weeks ago. I turned to look at my family. They looked like statues made of ice and regret. My father was staring at the helicopters, his mind unable to reconcile the scale of the machinery with the daughter he had tried to bribe with a rusted Honda. My mother was weeping silently, her tears freezing on her cheeks. Madison looked at the massive aircraft, then back at her G-Wagon, which suddenly looked like a child's toy left out in the yard. This is... My father wheezed, his voice broken. This is yours. This is Ether, I said, and we are leaving. But... The dinner, Mom whispered, her voice cracking. It's Christmas. I know, I said, and I'm spending it with my family. I gestured to the crew behind me. They were the ones who checked on me when I was sick. They were the ones who celebrated the billion-dollar valuation. They were the ones who saw me. Captain, I said, turning my back on the house. Load up. Wait! My father lurched forward, his boots slipping on the ice. He reached out a hand as if he could physically pull me back from the reality I had just unveiled. Alexandra, you can't just leave. We need to talk about this. About everything. I paused at the helicopter door, looking back at him. The searchlights cast long, distorted shadows across the snow, making my family look like ghosts fading in the light. What is there to talk about? I asked, my voice calm against the rising whine of the turbines. You wanted proof. You got it. You wanted me to show you one concrete thing that wasn't a fantasy. I showed you 3 combat-grade helicopters and a property deed. But... The house, Mom sobbed, her voice barely audible over the engines. You own our house. We've been paying rent to our own daughter. You've been paying 40% of the market rate to a landlord who saved you from bankruptcy, I corrected. I protected your credit. I kept a roof over your head. I gave you stability for 3 years. And in all that time, not once did you ask if I was okay. You were so certain I was failing that you never stopped to consider I might be the one holding you up. We just wanted what was best for you, Madison wailed, clutching her arms. No, I said. You wanted me to succeed on your terms. You wanted the corporate job, the husband, the leased car. When I chose a different path, you decided I was worthless without ever asking if I was happy. That's not love, Madison. That's control. The engines roared to life, the rotors blurring into a disk of steel. The wind picked up, stinging my face, but I felt nothing but heat. What happens now? Lauren shouted over the noise, her phone still raised, though she had stopped recording. Now I shouted back, you go inside and eat your Christmas dinner. You think about how badly you misjudged the people in your life. and maybe you learn that success doesn't always look like a G-Wagon. "Are you coming back, Dad?" yelled desperation, cracking his voice. "For New Year's, for anything." I looked at them one last time. The parents who mocked me, the sister who belittled me, the cousins who filmed my humiliation. "That depends," I said. "Can you have a conversation without counting my assets, without comparing me to Madison, without questioning my reality?" Silence stretched between us heavier than the snow. "I'll take that as a no." I climbed into the cabin. Captain Sterling offered me a hand, pulling me into the warmth of the leather interior. The door slid shut with a solid final thud, sealing out the cold, the judgment, and the past. "Let's go, Captain," I said, buckling in. "Where to, ma'am?" "Corporate headquarters first," I said. "Then the tropics." "I believe the crew earned a vacation." "Yes, ma'am." The helicopter lifted off, banking sharply to the left. Through the window, I watched my family shrink. They were just tiny figures now, standing next to a toy car in a yard that belonged to me. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from Dad, "Please come back." A text from Madison, "We need to talk." I didn't reply. I swiped left and hit delete. We climbed higher, breaking through the cloud layer into the clear, star-filled night above. I looked out at the horizon, vast and limitless. For 8 years I had built my empire in the dark. Now finally I was flying in the light. "To family," Captain Sterling said over the headset. I looked at my crew, professionals, loyalists, people who respected me for my mind, not my car. "To the family who sees you," I corrected. We flew south, leaving the winter behind. If you've ever had to build your empire in silence, while the world told you to be loud, share this story. You never know who needs to hear that their time is coming.